I'm Al. I work at Square Books, and we're really excited to have Tiffany McDaniel here tonight. Could you say hey real quick, Tiffany?
Hey, everybody.
Hey, so before we get started, we're going to talk a little bit about the Square Books upcoming events so you guys can join us and have lots of fun. So the first thing is this Saturday, Independent Bookstore Day. Yay! And it is all virtual. So, well, you know, you can come into Square Books, just wear that mask. But if you follow our Instagram, our Facebook, and our Twitter, um, you will be up to date completely with all of the merch we're offering, all of the fun, cool things and activities you can do to participate with us. Then on the 31st of this month, we have Greg Iles and Richard Grant discussing Richard Grant's newest book, The Deepest South of All. That's in conjunction with the Miria Books down in Jackson. It's going to be lots of fun, and if you want to attend that, all you need to do is send an email to rsvp@squarebooks.com, and we can get you on the list for that as well. And then our next event on September 1st is with Amy Naziku Matatil and Kiese Lehman, and it's for Amy's book World of Wonders, which is this excellent collection of nature essays. It's also illustrated. And all of the books that we just mentioned, including Betty, are signed, and they're available for purchase either by giving us a call, visiting squarebooks.com, or just coming in the store, and we're happy to get those books in your hands. And I think we will, okay, yeah, in the chat, there is a link to purchase Betty with the signed book plate. So if anyone's interested, which you should be because you're here, you can buy that book just by clicking the link. So Tiffany, we're so glad you're here. We're so excited. I absolutely loved Betty, and we talked about it before, but there were moments where I was reading the book, I had to close it and just hug it because I was like, no, this is so sad and beautiful. And I was hugging the characters. Could you tell us just a smidge about Betty before we get you to read?
Yeah, Betty is a special novel for me. It's inspired by my mother, Betty. And the origin of it, going back, it would have been nearly 20 years ago when she had shared a family secret with me. And that really opened the door on the family that I thought I had known. You know, I'd grown up around these family members, and there were certain things that I had already known about the family. You know, mom raised us in gardens, and so she had passed down all that sort of knowledge that Papa Landon had instilled in her and her siblings, and she would talk about him and her bond with him, and how great of a storyteller he was, and how supportive he was of her and her siblings. And so these sorts of things laid the foundation for what I had already known. And then when I was 17, I learned that secret, and it was really showing these other sides of the family. And once I had that, then I started to dig deeper into those conversations with mom. You know, I had further Q&A sessions with her, opening up on the different things she experienced, like the racism, the sexism, digging deeper behind her relationships with Landon, with her sisters, with her mother. And that led me actually to have the Q&A sessions with the other family members. So we're talking about Mama Alka and my aunts and my uncles. And so it was, you know, I don't know if I'll ever write another book where it was such a fascinating journey to get that story to the page and be able to talk to these people who had experienced these things, and sort of be the vessel through which their story was sort of taken to the page. And so it was just an incredible journey to get to know a family that I thought I'd already known, and Betty is sort of the efforts of that.
Well, it's an astounding effort, and it's stunning. Do you have the passage that you have decided to read?
Yes, I'm going to read the passage that introduces A Faraway Place to readers, and to just give a little backstory on that. So Papa Landon, who is a patriarch of the family, he is the father of my mother and my two aunts. And so he raised them with that matriarchal and matrilineal Cherokee society they really leaned on women as leaders and thinkers. And in the garden, he had built this stage for his daughters to go to, where, you know, Betty could write, and Flossie could practice her acting, and Freya could sing, and the girls named this stage A Faraway Place. And so this is our introduction to that. Me and my sisters named the stage A Faraway Place because even though it was in our yard, it seemed to be so far off in the distance, we were bound by no one and nothing. It was our world, and if you would have heard the language we spoke there, it would have sounded like English to your ear, but we would swear it was something incomparable. In our language, we told stories that didn't end, and songs were always of infinite choruses. We became one another until each of us was a storyteller, an actress, a singer-songwriter who measured the things around us until we felt as though we had mapped out the geometry from the life we had to the life we felt certain we were destined for. In many ways, A Faraway Place was our hopes and desires manifested into four corners of wood. I saw this in the way each one of my sisters would stand on the edge of the stage, the wind whipping their hair as they stood ever so still. They had never seemed so tall to me before, as they each planted their feet at a distance that felt powerful to them. One hand would be bunching the fabric of their skirts, the other placed out in front of them, feeling the wind against their palms. The way they looked out from the stage, it was as though they'd been alive so long they were already women. Yet we were still children there too. We would run around the stage, never venturing beyond its edge, as if the whole world was right there, and it was large enough for the dreams of three girls. We pretended to be shot in the heart only to rise from the dead. The sky turned upside down in an ocean we swam in, kicking our legs in the water as we kept one hand on the floating stage, the other free to splash and play or reach toward the whales swimming by. At night, when we felt the hard wood, it became the soft, warm body of a bird large enough to break from the earth and fly us so high there was no unhappiness to tell of. Flossie would run out onto a wing and say she was going to dive into the stars to become one. We shared one imagination and one pure and beautiful thought, that we were important and that anything was possible. There would always be so much dancing at the end. We would fall asleep on the stage only to wake the next morning at the very moment the sun rose, the pink and orange clouds performing, it seemed, just for us. That's a whole lot of sun, Freya always said. Not enough, Flossie would reply. I always felt somewhere in the middle when I said it's just right. And so it was just right on Our Faraway Place.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Gosh, thank you.
I actually remember reading that, and that was one of the instances where I paused and was like, I need a moment with this. And there's a lot of moments like that, a lot of just the loom of your family, the bones that the bones of the mechanism that they make, and then your story that you use to weave this whole book on is stunning. And I went in blind to this book. I was not super aware. I saw that it was the Appalachians in Ohio, and I was like, I'm in. I love the Appalachians. I love tough girls. I'm all for it. This was amazing. And I think something that a lot of readers, at least I wasn't expecting, is scattered throughout the main story of Betty. We have these little articles from the newspaper of where the family lives. Is that real? Was that also pulled from reality?
No, so the articles, that was actually something I came up in a later draft of the book. I saw this family and mom moving into the town. And I remember in those sessions, she was talking about how they would come into these predominantly white communities. And I am fair-skinned, and so I haven't had those experiences with racism that she and Papa had, because, they had brown skin. And at that time, especially, they were entering these predominantly white communities. And so oftentimes they were the only family of color there in that community. And she would talk about how they would go into these communities because they did all that traveling from the time that she was born in Arkansas until they settled in Southern Ohio. And she would talk about how they were sort of met with those ideas of what, especially at that time, Native Americans, which were kind of lumped together in the African culture, which was something that she talked about. You know, the racial slurs were oftentimes originating from that place. And so she talked about those reactions to the presence of her and the presence of her father and the presence of her family. And in many ways, when I was listening to her talk about those things, it was like, well, it was like they had gone into the town just shooting it up. And so in my mind, that was sort of akin to a gun going off, and their presence seemed to sort of culminate in this really loud bang within the community. And so as I was writing her coming of age, I sort of started to put in these articles and see this, you know, at their arrival, we have this mysterious gunfire that shatters a window in the store, and they're immediately thought to be the suspects. And I also use the articles as a way to sort of insert a subtle mention of that racial profiling. We have that one person who comments in the article that they don't trust anyone whose face bleeds into the night. And so, you know, just based on the color of their skin, they're sort of immediately suspected as being responsible for the gunfire. And that gunfire really becomes something that Betty comes of age with, you know, the secrecy and sort of, is it a family member firing it? Is it someone else in the community sort of trying to lay the blame on them? And of course, by the end of the book, we sort of come to the conclusion of who had been firing the gun. And I really saw that as the announcements of their presence, and also something that she was sort of bearing as a weight along with her on this journey.
Wow, that's awesome. Yes, no, I will say when I first saw the first article, I thought, oh God, I can't handle. I was so scared immediately. But you actually talked about the racial profiling in Betty, and I think that something that was so beautiful was how Betty's father celebrated her appearance, and what was so heart-wrenching was how her mother was either unable to or unwilling, and that was something that halted my heart for a moment, because I thought, no, you can't do that to a child, which is not true, but heart-wrenching nonetheless. How did you work through when you were writing those things?
Yeah, it was especially those more difficult moments, and going back to sort of that bullying that mom experienced, and of course how her appearance sort of shaped her identity. You know, landing with someone who really empowered her and told her, no, you're beautiful the way you are. Mom was really seeing herself as someone who was not deemed beautiful by society. She didn't reflect the image in the glossy magazines, which was women and girls who was more like her mother, with the blonde hair, the lighter skin, the lighter eyes. And so she was sort of up against this image of who she should be and what she should be. And, you know, I think about those moments and the bullying and sort of the racism she faced. And I think about those moments too that Mama Alka experienced as a young girl, that abuse and the abuse of the aunts, and sort of Lent's mental illness. And these were all things that we sort of fleshed out in those Q&A sessions. And so, you know, there was a great sense of responsibility to sort of carry those same feelings that they had experienced. And, you know, I remember Mom, when she was talking about how she felt about the way she looked, and she said, you know, she really felt as if she was insignificant within the community. And if not for her father sort of changing that direction, maybe her life would have different path. And you know, I didn't put it in the book, but there was she had told me this story about in school on career day, the high school students was supposed to go to the gymnasium, and the teacher said, no, Betty, you know, you stay behind, you're not going to do anything with your life anyways. And so even within sort of the walls of the school, which should have been very nurturing, you still had that racism that was kind of driving through. And so she was up against that, not only with the peers and the teachers, you know, but those adults that really should have been that figure directing her path. And I think without Landon present, it would have really been a much more difficult go for her. And I wanted to capture those experiences that she had because, like I said, I haven't had those personal experiences with racism. I remember when I was a kid growing up, and when my classmates would see mom, you know, they would say, I didn't know you were adopted, Tiffany, you know. And I'm like, I'm not adopted. She's my mom. You know, we just have different colors of skin. And so I saw how people responded to her as I was growing up. You know, strangers would come up to her and say, what are you? You know, kind of, are you from Mexico? Sort of all these sorts of things. That was a sort of subtle racism that I was picking up on. And so I couldn't even imagine the sort of racial slurs and kind of that much more violent streak, especially when she talked about, you know, Papa Landon, who had been beaten up in these communities based on the color of his skin. And so we're talking about a much violent racism that they personally experienced. And I hope to sort of infuse the story with those experiences without sort of inserting myself in that narrative.
Well, it was, I think it was well crafted. I also, you mentioned it earlier, but what was so jarring is that the people where the Carpenters live in that town, their bigotry, they couldn't even be bothered to be bigots in a way that you would apply to a certain person. It was just every evil thing that they could think to say they did. And you have a line near the end of the book, which I think is pertinent because, you know, Betty's whole life, like you said, except for Papa Landon, she hears nothing but she's not worthy. And there's a line right near the end of the book, and it doesn't give anything away, but it says something to the effect of, you have enough enemies in your life, you don't need to be an enemy of your own. And I'm not a person to mark up a book, but I like snatched my pencil and I underlined that, and that's the only thing I underlined. But I was like, this is definitely worth it. And I think that is a theme throughout the novel that's really impressive, because from all sides Betty is hearing different awful things, and she's still in those moments able to celebrate herself, especially with her dad. But I also really enjoyed just the dynamic of the siblings. And so you said that you had interviews that you did with your family members. I was thinking as I was reading Lent, I was like, God, I love this kid. I love him with all of my heart. So my question is, it seems like he had obsessive compulsive disorder of some kind. Each time something would happen, you know, it was familiar to see him ironing the shirt to keep the wrinkles, to keep the family, and we have all of the rocks. And I was wondering if that is something that you added in, or is this something that you saw present in your family?
Yeah, so Lent is inspired by my uncle, and he passed just a few years ago of an overdose. But I have all those fond memories of him growing up. You know, he always made sure there was butterscotch candies for me at the house, and sort of you know, he had those moments that he was really, really funny. But I also know that he was struggling with his mental illness. You know, I didn't put it in the book, but they had taken him to doctors from the time that he was a child, and he had been prescribed, you know, medicine. I think he was at probably 6 or 7 when the doctors first started prescribing him medication to deal with I don't know if they even really labeled it. At that time, they just said, you know, his problem. I think that especially in the 50s and the 60s, it was sort of less labeled than it is now. But he was someone who was on medication throughout his life and sort of struggling with those things. And for the book, I really wanted to focus attention on the relationship between Landon and Lint and what he had done for his son, and sort of strip it of the doctor visits and sort of strip it of those medications. And because I remember in those sessions I had with Lint, you know, and he was talking about how as a child the nights were especially difficult for him and he really struggled. And Landon would deprive himself of sleep and go into Lint's bedroom, and he would sit in a chair by his bed and tell him stories and talk to him all night long. And you know, Lint said it was just nights of me and Dad talking. And in so many ways that saved him, he said, because without having that figure in his life, it sort of set him like an anchor on the path, and sort of distracted him from those thoughts or sort of from those feelings. He doesn't know if where he would have ended up. And of course, you know, after Landon's death, we saw the siblings in real life, they sort of took that turn to addiction. And I think once they lost Landon, they really did lose that compass and to steering them forward. And so, you know, I think if Landon had lived, their lives would have turned out differently. And, you know, Lynn certainly expressed that. You know, he said, if I'd always had Dad by my side, you know, my path would have been set on a different course. And so for him, dealing with those things, you know, he was an uncle that I love dearly, have so many great memories of. And I know that he was so excited to see the book, and I wish he was here to see it. But I hope in spirit he's here. And the rocks, you know, he loved rocks, and he loved sort of the imagery in them, and he loved sort of I think he also just loved the weight of them in his hands. And so to see that was something that in the book I was able to give him an ending that, you know, in real life he didn't have. You know, he had died alone, and in the book I was able to say, you know, this is the path his life might have taken, which was stepping into Landon's shoes, taking over the plant business. And so in the book I was, you know, able to give him an ending that reality didn't necessarily bring to him. So he's a character who is dear to my heart.
Sorry. I
know.
love Lent. But to not cry and keep going with the event, the family dynamics, especially between Freya and the younger siblings, and how it kind of trickles down, because you've got you know, Freya's the oldest sister, then you have Flossie, and then you have, you know, Betty, and then the two youngest boys, and the oldest boy, Landon, and Landon. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. But the dynamic that I was really interested in is Tristan and Lint, and how the siblings would orbit around them. It seemed like the two youngest boys just sort of were existing as they were, and then life went around them, and they would occasionally intersect. I want to ask about Tristan's art. Is this something that is physical in this world, or is this something that you felt was needed in the book?
Yeah, so in real life, Mom actually had more brothers. And when I first wrote the book, I did have the entire cast of family. And so even though Lint is based on a very singular uncle, Tristan is actually sort of a composite of a couple of different uncles. And so, you know, this was a very artistic family. We had Betty, who was writing, and Freya, who was singing, and Flossie, who was acting. And Tristan really possessed those qualities of those uncles who was into the visual art. And so they were drawing and they were painting. And, you know, for one reason or another, I think they put it away after Landon had died. It was kind of his death sent these shock waves, and they kind of put that art away. And I wanted to sort of see Tristan embracing that and really sort of setting on this path that this is how he would spend his adult life, in a way that, you know, the uncles in real life had sort of kind of shut the book on their art and sort of left it when Landon had left this world. And so Tristan was a character that was shaped out of a few of those, and I hope to sort of, infuse him with the beauty of the art that they were and sort of the artists they were, and kind of show that their talent is there, and I kind of wish they hadn't put it away, but for one reason or another they did after Landon died. But he definitely represented their art.
He was, they honestly, there's something that's really I think people will, at least I think, is a signal of good writing, is it's not easy to decide how you feel about all of these characters, and that makes them extremely human, just like all of us. But I think cleanly and plainly we all do love Landon Carpenter, the patriarch of the family. And but I think one of the best things is how we were able to see how he interacted with each family member in the book. I also love all of Landon's stories. And I was wondering, did you have a favorite that you got to write for these?
I think perhaps because of the impact on their lives, I think the three sisters, and that's not necessarily because it was his story, because it was coming from the Cherokee culture, and it was also, adopted by many different Native American tribes. But I think, what he did so well was he had taken a story that he knew would empower his daughters, and he made sure that they were aware of it, and that they found it as sort of the support system. So I would say the three sisters, because how much it meant to them as young women, especially in the 1950s and the 1960s, facing, even more stereotypes than we as women do today. And so, through that story, he was an ally to them. And I think probably that story, just because of what it represented to them in a time that, to be a girl and to be a woman was, much more difficult than it is today. It's still difficult, but much more difficult then.
I can't even imagine. I think that we're going to be taking audience questions really soon. So yes. Okay. So here's the first question. Someone wants to know, are you working on anything new right now?
Yeah. So I should say it took Betty, nearly 20 years to get a publisher, and so I had some downtime to write other books, and I have over 12 at the moment. So there are a couple that I would like to follow Betty up with. One is on the Savage side, which is inspired about a true crime case out of Chillicothe, Ohio, which is the town next door to me in South Central. And a few years ago, some women had started to go missing, and a few days later, some time passed and some bodies were found. Some of the women have never been found to this day, but some of their bodies have been found, and the case remains unsolved. And as fate would have it, I had gone to grade school with one of the women who had gone missing up in Columbus, and whose case was suspected a link. And one of the women who went missing was named Tiffany. So I sort of felt that connection there, and it seemed like their case, because they were prostitutes and because they were drug addicts, that it was kind of being forgotten and sort of just seen as a risk of the trade. And so that book, I really wanted to show these women as mothers, sisters, daughters. They were important, their lives didn't matter. So I'm thinking possibly that book. And then one of the other ones, When Lions Stood as Men, is about a Jewish brother and sister who escaped Nazi Germany. They cross the Atlantic and end up in Breathitt, Ohio again, and they're sort of dealing with their own demons from that trip. And so I think either of those two would be good to follow Betty up with. But so those are the ones already written, and then I'm working on 3 new ones now. So we'll see, but always writing.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Oh my gosh. So we've got another question. Riley Morse says he loves your paintings and he's interested in the one of Lent. Anything you'd like to share about that?
Yeah, that's one of Lent. When I did his portrait, and I did it in the grayscale because I wanted to kind of represent what rocks meant to him in his life, and sort of this solid exterior behind all these sort of wild creatures coming out of his mind. You know, in the book, he talks to his dad, Landon. He says, you know, all these wild animals are inside me. I can feel, you know, deers running on my arms. I can feel, you know, lions in my back. And as I was listening to, you know, Lint talk about his symptoms and his feelings in those sessions, you know, remind me very much, you know, as if this was someone who had this whole wilderness and these wild animals inside him. And so I really wanted to apply that sort of feeling to the page, and show him as someone who did feel as if he had all these different creatures sort of pulling him one way or another. And the painting sort of represents that dynamic of seeing him coming out of this deer head, seeing the hawk sort of coming out of his head. It's sort of one of those Russian nesting dolls where you know, you pull one thing apart and you find another thing inside it. And so that painting, I really wanted to sort of represent his feelings, and out of those sessions, that sense that I got that, okay, this is someone who, you know, is sort of dealing with all these different lives inside of him.
So where can we find a photograph of that painting? Now, is it on your website?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
on
cool.
the tab art, and then behind the tab you can see like the photos of Landon, Alka, Lint is up there, so yeah.
Oh, cool, cool, cool. We've got another question, which is, can you describe your writing process?
Yeah, so Betty was a little different because I had the sessions and I had the note taking, but ordinarily when I do a book, I don't do any outlines or character sketches. I also don't write first on the computer. So I write with pen and paper first, and then I transfer in later. And, you know, because I do it that way, I have the notebooks sort of scattered around. And I like the evolution of writing that way, where it's not sort of dictated by an outline or something beforehand. And Betty's process was different because I had the notebooks with the notes. And so I would go back and I would refer to them as I was writing the story. And in her case, actually in all the cases of my work, I always go from beginning, middle, and end. So I don't sort of do any jumping around. I like to sort of grow and sort of embrace the plot and the storyline as the character is sort of unfolding with it. So I had those notes, and after I had that first draft written, I also continued to do other Q&A sessions with the family members to just fill in those holes, you know, and kind of ground the culture a little more. You know, what were you listening to? What were you eating? What were these sort of things? So sort of just crafting the scene like that. And when I do write of a particular time period, I will, you know, research the history, what was the events going on. But I like to have that in my mind, but I don't necessarily ground the work in that, because I want it to feel as if it's pretty timeless. It can last, or it can happen at any point in time. So I have few details that sort of ground it, but I also just like the approach of, you know, writing right there in the notebook and sort of seeing what naturally evolves.
So I'm just impressed. So this will be an impressed face for most of the rest of the event. So we have another question, which is, can you share authors or books that influence you?
When I was growing up, you know, mom valued reading so much. You know, she read to me and my sisters from the time we were in the cradle. And we always had, you know, our closet, instead of being full of clothes, it was full of crates and crates of books. And you know, something that she did early on was she would get us the collections of the myths of the Greek, the Egyptian, indigenous myths. And those I really gravitated to from the time I was little. And those sorts of stories, myths and legends and folklore, those are really the stories that I love the most, that I gravitate to. And so that's the first part of the answer. And then in terms of kind of specific authors that are kind of outside of that myth telling, I really love Shirley Jackson. I think she's a fantastic author. She's fantastic. You know, Toni Morrison, who's from Ohio. I've loved her work, you know, since I was in high school. Ray Bradbury, you know, he's sort of pegged as science fiction, but he has such a beautiful literary quality, especially in Dandelion Wine. And yeah, those sorts of authors that sort of write both realistic, but also sort of, you know, kind of risk the boundaries, those sorts of things I'm really drawn to. And I also really love nonfiction. I do a lot of true crime and the sciences. I love archaeology and sort of all those sorts of things. So I don't really I don't really have a genre that I won't touch, and pretty a wide reader. But the myths and legends and folklores, that's always what I first.
I'm gonna email you
Okay.
about that. So we've got one more question. This is gonna be the last one, but also this is what you get for being talented. Is if anyone wants to look at Tiffany's visual art, Square Books has dropped the link to look at that. And then the last question is related. They want to know if the paintings came before the story or after, and do you see when you're writing?
It's funny. From the time I was little, I was sort of making handmade books, and I would always have the visual component to it. And as I started to graduate into writing short stories and the novels, I would write the story, and then I do the visual partner after, because I like to get it on the page and then be able to stare into the eyes of the character. And I think especially with Betty, it was such an important part of the process, because I was sort of seeing my ancestors face to face. I was seeing Landon face to face. He had died over a decade before I was born, so I really shaped his character out of those sessions, out of the family members. And I have the rare photograph of him, but the painting sort of allows me to see him as the young man. Mama Alka, he had the most beautiful long hair, and so the painting sort of gave me the chance. I don't have a photograph of that, but the painting sort of gave me the chance to see him as a young man, and then see him as an older man, and then the paintings of my mother. And so they allow me to add this sort of layer to the characters. And sometimes, it's good too, because even if I finish a book, I know that there's editing later. And so I finish the book, I'll do the visual character sketches, and then I go back and I look at them, and then maybe when I go to edit, then it sort of has an effect there. So yeah, they're an important part of the process for me. I've always been very visual, so yeah, it's good.
That is wonderful. Oh, good golly. I was so excited to do this event. We're about to wrap up, so I just want to remind everyone watching that if you want to buy this book, if you want to buy Betty by Tiffany, you can give us a call at 662-236-2262. Visit our website, squarebooks.com, or you can come to the store, the main store, Square Books, and pick up a copy. We have signed book plates. Thank you so much for that. And if anyone wants to share this event shortly after we end, you can go to our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and tap in Square Books on the search bar, and you'll see all of the recordings of this event and past and future events. Tiffany, thank you so much for writing this book and for letting me speak to you today. This was wonderful.
Oh yeah, I can't thank you enough. It's one of my favorites. So thank you.